Welcome to the Corporate Counsel Business Journal's daily podcast, In-House Warrior, with host Richard Levick, chairman of Levick, a global crisis and litigation communications firm.
Good day and welcome to In-House Warrior, the daily podcast of the Corporate Counsel Business Journal. Today we launch a new program, Garage to Global, a weekly program looking at Silicon Valley and how we create opportunities for rapid growth companies. My co-host today, Ian Lipner, the head of Levick's Cyber and Emerging Companies practice. Ian, as always, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here today in particular to launch this series.
And also with us from sunny Silicon Valley, Louis Lehot, who is with L2 Counsel, and he specializes in getting companies formed, financed, and scaled for hypergrowth. Louis, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Richard. It's an honor.
It's always great to work with you. We're delighted to kick off this series with you. Our guest today is Rohyt Belani, who is the CEO of Cofense. Rohyt, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
To begin, why don't you talk a little bit about Cofense and what you do and where you are in the market?
Sure thing. Yeah. So, I've spent 2 decades in cybersecurity after I graduated from Carnegie Mellon. So a little bit of competition there, Louis, I guess, and for Stanford. But I got into cybersecurity. I went and worked at a startup, and my life's been 4 different startups in cybersecurity, 2 of which I was an early employee, 2 which I founded. Knock on wood, they've all been acquired and had very successful exits. But during that time, what I learned was that there was a lot of focus by the larger players and startups alike on, let's come up with additional technology, trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, if you may will, to stop cyber attackers. Whereas the attackers, unfortunately, have continued to outsmart us to the day, even when you hear about the most recent compromise that occurred via SolarWinds and so on, that they find very simple, elegant solutions, unfortunately, to compromise all of us. And one of the attack mechanisms that my co-founder, Aaron, and I really homed in on was exploitation of human susceptibility via email, commonly known as phishing. So whether it's a ransomware attack or someone trying to get you to wire funds or install malicious software, malware on your systems, it often starts with a phishing email that's received by an employee or a group of employees in an organization. And what we found fascinating was that no one was really focused at the time when we launched Cofense, formerly known as FishMe, on addressing the human element. So we said, that's what we're going to do. First, we're going to fortify the human element. We're going to condition humans to get better at not falling for these attacks. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to immersively educate them, as in simulate these sorts of attacks on our customers' behalf on a frequent basis, or give them the software to do so, where they can replicate the threat and get folks conditioned. But more importantly, it's not just about the conditioning to not fall for the attack. It's sort of the see something, say something idea is what we wanted to put forth. I live here in New York City, and you see the see something, say something pasted all over the walls in the subway stations and so on. And really the fact of the matter is, if someone sees a suspicious package on a subway, the New York Police Department doesn't just want the person to not board the train. They want them to actually call out the suspicious package, because everyone's lives are important. And so we kind of took that same message and said, if you see something suspicious, let's call it out. And we really gave the employees of our customers the ability to very quickly call it out via a button in the email client. It's sort of tag suspicious email. Fast forward a few years of us doing this, we found we have over 25 million people globally using this button, growing at 100,000 per week. So we have crowdsourced intelligence on suspicious emails across the globe, across industries, and we've been able to develop software that takes in this very noisy channel of crowdsourced intelligence and finds the needle in the haystack to say, what's benign, what's indeed malicious, and let's get the bad out of your systems. So really, to summarize it, we're in the business of phishing detection and response at Cofense. but from a very different angle, which is embracing the human to make them part of the security posture versus in my 2 decades in cybersecurity, you get tired of hearing the human's the weakest link.
No, that's an awesome introduction, Rohyt, and thank you for that. I am so curious about your entrepreneurial journey, and where I sit in Silicon Valley, we see them in every iteration. And one of the things that is most exciting for me is to learn what was the tipping point. What was that moment in time that got where the product really caught on, and what was it that you did to bring it to ubiquity?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a couple of steps back there, Louis. And when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I learned a lot of lessons there. And I was telling a younger cousin of mine the other day, I'm glad I learned those lessons while I was a grad student. One of them, two of the lessons was sleep's not necessary for survival. I learned that at Carnegie Mellon. They taught you that for sure. The other thing, on a serious note that I learned was that, just being accountable, just a short anecdote there. I came here as an immigrant student, and I was only allowed to do jobs on campus being on a student visa 20 years ago. And, I didn't want my dad having to pay for my expenses and so on. It was very expensive in terms of Indian rupees. So I was doing 2 jobs and grad school, and I was dropping the ball all around the park, essentially doing that. Just, it wasn't humanly possible. And I actually got, the only time in my life I've been fired from a job was from a teaching assistantship at Carnegie Mellon, because I'd taken on too much, and I just missed a whole bunch of deadlines the professor had set me. So I learned those lessons quick. And, when I came into the world of cybersecurity, what I learned was that really it was intellectual property, and a laptop is what you needed to get started. And so I spent the first 5 years of my career, 5 or 6 years, working at startups, learning the ways of how things work. And I was very fortunate to be exposed to some of these very successful startups and hone my skills to some extent at their expense. But it was 6 years of doing that. Both my co-founder and I realized, hey, really the initial investment required is 2 laptops. So literally the first company Aaron, my co-founder, and I started, we started by putting $6,000 each into a bank account, which we used to buy laptops and keep a little spare cash in the bank account. And, that's where Intrepidus Group, and then afterwards FishMe as well got started. We never infused a single dollar of capital after that of our own. It was obviously venture capital went into the companies, but it was $6,000 each.
That's incredible. When you start in that very early stage, that's sort of the garage that we refer to in Garage to Global. Tell us a little bit more about what that working environment was like, and how you started to climb into becoming something that resembled a startup company.
Yeah. So, the journey, like I say, it was from, call it -2 guys, where I was still trying to convince Aaron that he should leave his cushy job that he had and we should start the company. So I call it -2 guys, me and him, to 400 employees globally today at Cofense. It's been, like I said, it's been a journey that honestly I couldn't have even imagined. I'd love to say I did, but I couldn't have imagined. It's awesome. But when we first got started, I remember I called Aaron up, and we had worked together for many years. He's based in the DC area. I'm based in New York. And I called him on a Thursday and I said, hey, could I come over to your place and spend the weekend with you? He's like, what's this about? I said, more of the same. Try to convince you we need to start something together. And he sort of begrudgingly said, all right, this guy's going to eat into my weekend plans. Sure, you can come over. And back then, all I could afford was I took one of those Chinatown buses from New York to DC. It was a Fenghua bus. I literally got into this thing where the seat was broken, so I couldn't, it was in constant recline mode. I felt bad for the person behind me. I get to DC, but we didn't have an office the first year and a half. We were bootstrapped, and we really focused on understanding, what customer needs were not being met. It took us doing a lot of consulting work first to get entrenched in Fortune 500 companies and see firsthand what the bad guys were doing, to say, okay, now we can sort of really zone in on what this idea is. We sort of knew that email security was the issue we wanted to address, but what in that It took about a year and a half of doing that prototyping. And we sort of, unlike a lot of Valley startups, or at least in the last 5 years, the way I've seen the trend go, we didn't raise seed capital. We decided we're going to defer raising capital. Till we had about 20 to 25 paying customers. So once we did that, and then we raised our Series A, we were able to manage the dilution to some extent in the company. But it was also a lot more confidence for the investors coming in, saying, okay, these guys have brought a product to market that 25 enterprises have actually adopted. There's product market fit enough to back these guys up. We were first-time entrepreneurs at the time. The story's a little different, fortunately, now, but so that's how we got started. Like I said, we were fortunate. The timing worked out.
When you think about timing,
yep,
were you worried that you were too quick to market at the beginning? Were you worried that the market understood? How did cybersecurity companies miss the opportunity that you spotted?
I think even today, a lot of companies will say the human's the weakest link, and it's sort of their approach is the human's stupid and you have to build a technological moat around them. Our thinking's a little different. Our thinking is you absolutely need technology. Nothing can be solved by humans alone, but we believe that there is a healthy intersection of human and technology, which then becomes extremely difficult in cybersecurity for the attackers to prevail. And to expand on that a little bit, a lot of the technologies that are used today to detect attacks, may have artificial intelligence and machine learning, but at the end of the day, as the very word says, they're artificial in their intelligence, and humans, I believe, are smarter and can outwit these technologies, and they do. And so our thinking is, if we are able to enable every employee to have a healthy amount of skepticism and suspicion when interacting with email, to be able to call suspicious emails out, there will be some folks that will fall prey to these attacks, some folks that may just delete it, but there'll be a good number, and we see it today, that will in real time report it. But by doing that, what we've done is we've created this non-deterministic detection system, if you may will. The attacker doesn't know what they're up against. If they send an email to the 5 of us, they don't know which one of us is going to react in what manner, versus with technology, they can reverse engineer that. So what we've really done is we've taken their own game, turned the tables. We've made detection sort of turn into this very non-deterministic mechanism. And then once things are detected, to take it from there to actually scale and respond and act quickly and quarantine the threat, that's where we leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, and technology. So it's a different approach. I would say it's only been the last 18 months or so. And, like I said, we're not really a startup per se anymore. We've got 400 employees. We're inching up towards the 100 million revenue mark. And, it's only been in the last year or so that we've seen other players in the space actually acknowledge that, oh yeah, maybe there's a different way to view this, that the humans aren't just stupid meat tubes.
So Rohyt, 2 questions here, 2 sides of the same question. One is, sure, in the beginning, when did you start sleeping well at night? When did you know, this from vision to reality, this is going to work, and the model's working, and we can sell it, and sell the product? And 2, in an arena which is always disrupting, how do you deal with the fear of being disrupted yourself? As a market leader, you're starting to see the market follow you.
Yeah, no, great question. So I would say sleep well at night. I wish I could say I sleep well at night. I would jokingly say I've slept like a baby all my life, which is wake up every 2 hours and cry. But I never rest on my laurels. Maybe that's, that my wife calls out, that's a little bit of a personality issue with me. I'm always sort of trying to look around the corner and think about what may be issues. It's different issues, right? In the early days, you're worried about when you're not well capitalized, are you going to survive? So it goes from survive to, okay, let's stabilize, to then grow. So I think, it's different issues at different stages. And I think your second question sort of feeds well into that is, once you do get traction, it's easy to get carried away and believe, it's sort of one and done. But, I think it's just getting started. And when other people see success, there's naturally it's natural that competition shows up. big and small. And, it's the case for everyone. So from our perspective, the area that we really focused on from the get-go was, look, if as a company today, if you try to defend yourself just by building, and I'll put in air quotes, superior technology, at some point you're going to have your lunch eaten. Because, if you think of I don't know, I'll just use an example, like let's say a large player like Microsoft decided, hey, this is what we want to do, and it competes with us. I mean, they have a lot more capital and they have a lot more people, and they can build even more superior technology, right? So that's for anyone. The way we've thought about this and resisted and overcome these challenges is always focused on what is the insurmountable data moat that we can build, where even if someone builds technology that may appear superior to ours, our data that fuels it is something they cannot replicate. And that's something, as I said, with that crowdsourced base of people that are reporting suspicious emails into our platform with 25 million and growing every day. That's really the secret sauce here. A lot of folks may say, look, Microsoft or any of these large email security gateways are privy to a lot of different attacks. The interesting part is they're privy to attacks that hit their infrastructure. Given where we operate, we are privy to attacks in all infrastructures, in all industries, in all geographies. So at Cofense, we actually know what type of email cyber attacks evade every possible email security vendor. And that's the data moat that we've created that's insurmountable. So I'll say it helps me sleep a little better at night, not to say that I sleep well at night.
You talk about the human factor and how important that is in security. And I can't help but think for those who are building technology companies, the human factor is just as important as the tech they're building. How did you choose the folks to bring along on the ride, the leaders at the various stages? What were the qualities that you were looking for, and which ones were unique to your brand?
Yeah, I think, there's a different set of qualities that Aaron and I have looked at from, call it the early stages to the mid stages to now, where we're really scaling and looking to get, well into the, 9 figures and beyond in revenue. And so it's different skill sets. But I think one that sort of sticks out is, not to come across as risking work-life balance. That's not what I'm saying, but a relentless pursuit is what I try to find in folks that I look for in the management team and beyond. It's just that desire to want to produce high quality work. I mean, I learned this. I grew up in India. Look, it's a country with 1.3 billion people. And, if, for example, to get into engineering school, I was explaining to my son who's born in New York and growing up here, and it's very different. You're vying for extremely minimal resources in a country like India with a very large population. So I grew up in Mumbai, 20 million people. Every year, 20,000 of them, 40,000 of them want to go into engineering school, and you have probably 1,500 to 2,000 vacancies in those engineering colleges that open up through the course of the year. So it's like, you're going to have to fight your way there, and you have to take pride in your work. And so that's sort of ingrained in my DNA. And it's something I look for in a real, when it comes to focus on solving the customer's needs. Oftentimes what I find is a lot of CEOs and founders can get extremely spun up and caught up about beating competition per se. And yes, that's important. But the way I look at it is, look, if you really listen hard to the customer's needs and you're in relentless pursuit to give the customer the best possible solution, you will naturally beat competition. And so that's really what I look for in my management team, is that ultra sharp focus on the customer. And that extends to, when I say customer, it's external and internal. It's our own team members. I view them as customers. So it's our team members and external customers. And to me, the rest follows.
Rohyt, what do you see as what's next? We've talked about a maturing market, and now other companies are starting to think like you think. What do you see? What's around the corner?
Yeah, I think, from a purely technological standpoint, the migration to the cloud, which was already on its way, and I think we all acknowledge the pandemic has just accelerated that by a few years in most cases. is occurring, and so from our perspective, we're happy that our solution set, as we had built it over time, was geared to assist with this. And people are really rethinking the security stack. I mean, 20 years ago when I used to do this, the thinking used to be, well, here's my perimeter. Here's where I'm going to put a firewall that's going to take care of 90% of the problems. Well, there is no perimeter now. Every mobile device is a perimeter. Every human's part of the perimeter. It's all in the cloud. It's a fuzzy concept. And so, what I look at is there's going to be a lot of disruption, as there already is occurring, but in cybersecurity, where legacy companies that have really milked their cash cows for years by building a piece of software that sort of sat as part of the perimeter stack, and they just got renewal year after year, are going to be redundant in if they're not already there very shortly. And so that's something we think a lot about is, in a pure cloud world, we're not quite there today. It's more of a hybrid environment, but in a pure cloud world, how can we be positioned to give our customers the easiest deployable products, the ones that take advantage of the network effect that I alluded to earlier in the conversation, and just make it very cost effective, high quality in the cloud. And that's really what our focus is for the foreseeable future here.
Earlier, Rohit, you had spoken about relentless pursuit. Mm-hmm. How do you identify people who, you talked about trying to figure out with a work-life balance, but how do you one, identify people, and two, balance is always a term that people of a certain generation don't use and people of another generation do use. As an entrepreneur, 7 days a week is usually just not quite enough time.
Yeah, I've learned over the course of my career that it's easy to get carried away and think that the longer hours you work and the more you work, the better off you'll be, and sometimes that's it's counterproductive. Of course, in the early days of the company, we had no choice. You're wearing multiple hats, literally, from running payroll to selling to actually coding to doing the work. So there was no option there, but over time, you learn people do need to recharge and rejuvenate, and it really helps. So I'll share an example with you. You asked me about relentless pursuit. So, for example, on the sales front, right? When, that's an area where, it epitomizes the need for relentless pursuit, in my opinion. And when we interview people here at Cofense, and I'll spill a little secret, I actually tell our teams that, when we think we found a good candidate and we're getting close to the final stages of negotiating their deal with them, their employment agreement and deal, let's just go dark on them for a day and a half or so. And I want to see how they react. Like, just go dark. And this is a salesperson. To me, they're supposed to have that relentless pursuit of, okay, I'm going to try to, if I'm selling to someone, they go dark on me. What are the different tactics they use? How do they pressure me pleasantly to come back to the table? And it's very telling when you see how people react with that little bit of a stress trigger in that situation. So, those are the sorts of little tricks that we use to kind of see how people are structured in terms of pursuing something.
And you said you had how many therapists on call?
Well, I have mine.
Louis?
Rohit, we're getting really criticized in Silicon Valley about our failure to build diverse teams. And I'm curious as to how you handle the issue of diversity, whether it's, and we know that there are many different kinds, yeah. But tech companies continue to be the province of men and a lot of white men, and I'm curious in your company, how is it that you're tackling this issue?
Yeah, no, it's I think it's an issue for companies across the board, and to me it's an important one. Look, I come from a minority diverse background myself. I've in the early days of being in the US in my career, I've dealt with my share of interesting sort of experiences to reflect on and think, okay, how can we enhance opportunities for everyone? We have internally, and this actually happened only this year, so I would say a little late, but better late than never. I instantiated a diversity Equality and Inclusion Committee here at Cofense that I lead. I have 2 women of both of, a minority that help manage the committee. We have several members internally here that participate. And we've made some really good progress. It's, ranging from things like, hey, when we're hiring, for example, after the recruiting teams have done the sifting of the initial sifting of resumes, what they're doing now is they're actually redacting any information that could be attributable towards the gender or race of a person on the resume before handing it on to the hiring managers for evaluation, just to make sure that if there's any sort of innate subconscious biases, even that those are taken out of the equation. So that's something we're actively doing. We're working with different agencies that focus on sourcing candidates across diverse backgrounds. So we're not just sort of going, hands up in the air. We're going to put the job description out there, and the first person to walk in the door that we believe is a good fit is it. Recognizing that not everyone has equal access to opportunity here. While we're not a huge organization, we do have a global presence. We have 6 offices globally. We have folks in the Middle East. We have folks in Japan, Australia, Europe, the US, Philippines. And we've really we've put in an effort to be more culturally aware. So when we have holidays or celebrations and festivals in different parts of the world, we have folks that are in our offices kind of educate the others on what it is and so on. So in general, we're just trying to I think there's 2 levels, right? Strategically, just making people more aware that there's different kinds of people, there are different kinds of cultures, there's different kinds of thinkings, and then, putting in tactical controls to ensure that even in the short term, those innate subconscious biases are squashed as successfully as possible.
Where do you go on a near daily basis to get your great ideas, your creativity? The best-selling author, Martin Lindstrom, who pre-COVID was on the road, 250, 300 days a year, always insists that his hotel have a swimming pool, and he spends every morning swimming that mile. And that's where ideas generate. How do you and where do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. Giving yourself some mental down cycles is very important. It's just, it's very easy to get caught up in, just having a day meeting after meeting, and especially these days, Teams or Zoom meeting after meeting, and it just gives you no time to think. So from my perspective, look, when I am scheduling, I can be a little irritating and annoying where I try to limit the number of meetings I put on my calendar. So oftentimes people will say internally, because they can see my calendar, and they say, well, your schedule isn't packed and you're saying you can't meet me today. And I'm like, that's exactly right. I can meet you tomorrow, because I have to draw boundaries and make sure that I have time to think about stuff. So I try to set aside some amount of time every day, and also try to cluster my meetings and interactions with other folks as much as possible to say, okay, today, it's going to be a bunch of morning meetings. No, it doesn't work every day, and today is going to be a bunch of afternoons. So I can get some solid, contiguous time to think about things. But to your point, in the pre-pandemic normal world, when I traveled a lot as well, I carried my books on a Kindle with me, so I spend airplane time reading, and that gives me a lot of ideas. I'm a big reader of nonfiction and things about how people are doing different things in different domains. But even at the hotel, kind of the same thing. You're just you're not eating very really good food and so on when you're socializing, taking clients out and so on. So I had a rule, like if I was going to eat dessert, I would only do that if I'd exercised that morning. And so naturally, given my sweet tooth, I'd land up getting on the elliptical or treadmill every morning, and that was sort of my equivalent of the swimming session you talked about there, which is just 45 minutes to an hour of plain mental downtime. So and ideas just come by themselves. Like, I'm not trying to be purposeful actually in that period of time, saying, hey Rohit, you need to come up with some ideas. Just giving yourself mental downtime, I found, just gives you ideas. So it gets you thinking.
If we do a Reader's Digest version summary of this, 30 seconds on this show, it'll just be eat more sweets will be the key takeaway.
It'll be justify your eating. Only if you spend time exercising, then eat sweets. And that's my mantra.
We are looking for a little bit of an advantage when it comes to biohacks, mental hacks, and growth hacks. As you look at the way the economy and the way the technology world is set up today, what would be your advice to a young company, to a small group of founders, knowing that there's maybe a little bit more capability in the hands of an engineer now with cloud computing, knowing that there's maybe a little bit more capital opportunity as minority investment rises? What would be your piece of advice to your equivalent if you had a clone that popped up today?
Yeah, I think when I first started my first company, it's 13 years plus ago, it was different times, and truly is all the things that you just said. I not that it's easier, ideas are a very small part of it, but I think executing on those ideas in a capital efficient manner is a little easier today, given cloud computing and everything else. On the same hand, you have a lot more talent is more expensive today than it was back then, because Silicon Valley's pumped a lot of money into a lot of startups, and people are willing to pay huge packages to folks. So there's been a little balancing there. I would say though, technologically, I kind of look at it saying, I would recommend to a younger myself, don't be intimidated just because someone bigger is in a particular space. The barrier to entry is definitely lowered from a technological standpoint. And, of course, I would kind of look at it as the person that owns the data owns the game in technology. So unless you feel like, hey, the data moat is so insurmountable, then maybe you look elsewhere. But purely technology, that's not a technical hurdle anymore. Anything's possible. Small startups are coming and way more than ankle biting away at the larger players and actually beating them at the game every day. We see it in every domain. Someday Facebook was a small company, right? And here we are. So that's sort of what I would say is the fear of the mega companies which existed 20 years ago, given how expensive it was to get started technologically, just that's gone, and that's great.
In-House Warrior is sponsored by Corporate Counsel Business Journal, the leading resource for corporate legal executives for over 25 years. Go to ccbjournal.com to receive your free issue today and to listen to more episodes of In-House Warrior. Rohyt, in closing, I know you've given a lot of tips for other entrepreneurs who are following in your footsteps from the garage. Any other thoughts you want to leave them with that are equally as inspiring as never be intimidated by the giants?
Yeah, it's interesting. A few years ago, I read the book by Pour Your Heart Into It, Starbucks' former CEO, and there's something interesting that he said in there, which was, he had, I think, 250 investors slam the door shut on him before one agreed to give him the money to take, Starbucks from being a company that sold coffee beans and out of one little retail or two retail outlets to the giant it is today. And, not to that extent, but I've had a lot of doors slammed on my face by investors, and I don't hold it against them. Look, they're doing their jobs, but it's very easy to get discouraged. And so, I'd kind of say, what comes to mind is the famous Chumbawamba song, Tup Thumping, which says, I get knocked down, but I get up again. So to me, that resiliency is really important. If someone's looking to be an entrepreneur, you are going to fall, you're going to get knocked down. And if you don't have it in you to have to repeatedly get up and say, I'm going to go at it again, you're not in the right business.
Rohyt, thank you so much for joining us today on this inaugural podcast of Garage to Global. Great speaking with you.
Well, thank you.
This is Richard Levick for In-House Warrior, the daily podcast of the Corporate Counsel Business Journal, and this is our new weekly program, Garage to Global. I've been joined by Ian Lipner and Louis Lehot, and our guest, Rohyt Belani. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to the Corporate Counsel Business Journal's daily podcast, In-House Warrior, with host Richard Levick. If you've enjoyed listening to our show, please rate and subscribe to the In-House Warrior on your favorite podcast platform.